In this video, we'll go over how you can use Workspaces. Workspaces allow you to control how your data is exposed to users in your system. When you log into a client application like the status runtime or the status model browser, only the assets, types, and properties you have access to will be displayed. Roles are simply groupings of user accounts. They allow you to specify a group of users to add to your workspace. Before you begin configuring your workspace, you'll need to determine what roles you need in your model. This could be something like an engineer's role, a database administrator role, or other levels of permissions. To create a role, I'm going to click on the Security tab. Next, I'll click the Add Role button. This will open a dialog allowing me to name this role. I'll give this the name of Engineers and click OK. Now that I have my role, the next thing I'll need to do is add a user to this role. To do this, I'll come over to the Included Members section, then click Add Account to Role. This will show me all of the users I have available in my model. I can then select one from this list and click OK to add it to this role. As a side note, users can be created in the Assets tab. If you select the Users view, then click Add Asset, you'll be prompted with the Add User dialog where you can enter a username for your user. These users can either be stored in your model or selected from your Active Directory users. Now that we have a role, we can create a workspace, so I'll switch to the Workspaces tab to get started. You'll see that we already have an administrator's workspace. This is created when your initial model gets generated during install. Ideally, you'd use this workspace to invoke all of your administrator privileges, like restricting access to the Users section of your model. So let's create this workspace now. I'm going to click the Add Workspace button, then enter Engineer's Workspace as the name and click OK. Next, I'll add my role by clicking the Add Role button and selecting my Engineer's role. We now have our Engineer's role added to our workspace. Before I go any further, I want to take a moment to talk about this User Accounts section of the UI below the Roles area. It is possible to add users directly to your workspace. Remember, a role is just a collection of users, so it's perfectly acceptable to add users directly to a workspace without creating a role. There may be situations where you need to temporarily grant access to workspaces configured, but don't want to add that user to a role that has access to it. In that scenario, adding the user to the workspace would be your best option. Now that we have our workspace configured, the next thing we'll need to do is add assets to it. By default, none of the assets you create are added to workspaces. When this happens, the assets you create will be visible to all users. To change this, you'll need to add these assets to the workspaces you've created. To demonstrate this, I'll switch to the Assets tab so we can begin. Before we do anything though, let's take a minute to look at our model. Is there anything in here that we don't want everyone to see? The only thing that jumps out is the Users view. We definitely don't want anyone to have access to the users other than the administrator role. The rest of these assets are most likely okay with being exposed to the various roles that you define, since there's no administrative level assets defined here. So now that we've figured out what should be visible and what shouldn't, we'll need to add our workspace to the Users view. To do this, I'll select the Users view from the asset tree, then I'll click on the Workspaces button at the top. This will bring up the Workspaces dialog. From here, you can click the Add button and then select a workspace from the one you have available. For this, I'll select the Administrator's Workspace, then click OK. Next, I'll verify that I've selected the right workspace, and then I'll click the Close button. Now that our workspace is applied to the Users view, only users added to the Administrator workspace will be able to see these assets. The next thing we'll need to do is to try this out and see if it's working properly. To do this, I'm going to close the model designer, then reopen it. This time, instead of logging in with the administrator account, I'm going to log in using the Engineer1 account we created. Now I'll just click the Connect button and wait for this to log in. Next, I'll switch to the Assets tab to see if the user's view is available or not. And as you can see, that view is hidden from us since we're logged in with a user that's not a part of the administrator workspace. So now I'll close the model designer again and reopen it. This time I'll use administrator as my username instead of engineer1. Then I'll click connect and wait for it to log in. Then I'll switch to the Assets tab and you'll see that we have our user's view available to us again. In closing, Status Enterprise is a powerful, easy to use tool that lets you design once and deploy multiple times. For more information about Status Enterprise and Workspaces, please visit us on the web at www.B-Scada.com.